welcome to How to Fix It. 7 years ago last week, I finished up my first book series review over on the Literary Lair, reviewing the 4 Red Dwarf novels written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, although not necessarily together. And naturally, given that I decided to undertake that task in my first year of making videos, and the fact that it was only starting from the second video in that series, the review of Better Than Life, that I actually decided to start writing scripts instead of just rambling off the top of my head, those videos are not very good. And to commemorate those not very good videos, and the fact that a new Red Dwarf special is in development, and to commemorate something else that I'll get to later on, and because it's just been a while since I did a Red Dwarf video, and I just want to break out the Rimmer costume again, I'm going to do a Red Dwarf video. But what to review? Well, I could check out a week episode from one of the original 8 series, or I could check out a week episode from one of the newer series, but I think I'll go with a happy medium. I'll check out all 3 episodes of Series 9, aka Back to Earth, aka the bridge between classic and modern Red Dwarf. It's basically the equivalent of the 1996 Doctor Who movie, except it actually did lead to the series getting revived. It just takes a really long time for them to make the episodes, so in the last decade we've only gotten 3 series since. Anyway, let's rejoin the boys from the Dwarf as they go back to Earth. It's been about 10 years, but the boys from the Dwarf are back, and it's just like in the old days. Well, except that Holly is offline due to Lister causing a flood that hasn't been dried up yet, and Kochanski is dead. In Crichton's defense, he thought for sure that opening the restroom airlock while she was using it was a perfect prank for Crichty TV. And if you remember the finale of Series 8, you might notice a few things are a tad different. First up, the ship's been redesigned back to its older, stouter design, and the rest of the crew have gone off to parts unknown. Good riddance. And Rimmer is once again a hologram, though whether or not this is the original Rimmer who had gone off to become Ace Rimmer in Series 7, the resurrected Rimmer last seen in the final moments of the Series 8 finale, or some combination of the two has yet to be seen as of now, 10 years later. But Red Dwarf was never big on continuity, so it doesn't really matter. I choose to believe he's a composite hologram using an old holodisc from Starbug and memories from the resurrected Rimmer. Happy medium. We open up on a characteristic Lister Rimmer bunk scene about ironing sneezes before we get into the main stuff, just like in the old days. Lister is depressed because Kochanski is dead and goes to read to her memorial, as Crichton vacations at the V-Deck broom closet and Rimmer is studying for an exam. They're all interrupted when the cat shows up, drenched in water, claiming that he was attacked by a tentacle.
This massive testicle
coming out of their last usable water tank. They set off to capture the creature, with Rimmer remaining behind to monitor them as Lister, Crichton, and Cat use a diving bell to go into the water tank. They're attacked by the squid, and since Rimmer is distracted by music instead of monitoring, they almost get killed when the squid breaks into the diving bell. Thankfully, they manage to come out relatively unscathed after fighting their way out, and everyone, including Rimmer, is covered in ink. Crichton tells them that the squid had dimension-hopping powers and must have settled in their tank while taking a breather. But before they can wonder any more, another hologram appears out of nowhere. Katerina Bardakovsky, Russian Red Dwarf science officer who we've never heard of before, who is replacing Rimmer as senior officer and intends to ensure that Lister will complete his mission to repopulate the human race and finally make it back to Earth.
He said it! He said it!
Katerina intends to deactivate Rimmer and destroy his hard drive, and use the tentacle of the squid to create a dimension cutter to locate a suitable mate for Lister from another dimension where the human race isn't extinct. Everything seems to go according to plan, except that when they activate the dimension cutter, it predictably goes haywire, and declares that the Red Dwarf dimension is invalid, and shunts them all into the nearest valid dimension, which happens to be our Earth. Or at least a very, very close copy of our Earth where Red Dwarf never went off the air. You know, that's the same one that has like 20 extra seasons of Doctor Who and 7 seasons of Star Trek Phase 2. They end up in the department store electronics department playing a trailer of the exact special that we're watching.
Instant cassettes. They're out in stores before the movie is finished.
They start wandering around and eventually realize what I just explained and grab the DVD case for the special to find out where to go next. discovering that they're meant to.
The dwarf is in best Blade Runner tradition.
Find their creator to plead for more life, and now we get to the other reason why I'm covering this right now. The entire plot with the creator is a parody of the film Blade Runner, and this month marks the time that Blade Runner ceases to take place in the future, since the events occurred in November of 2019, and I wanted to commemorate that, but I didn't have any open book review slots to do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, so I decided to have fun with it. They scavenge for loose change and head off with the cat making an origami squid, again in reference to Blade Runner. They go to a sci-fi shop to find out where they can find one of the creators of the show, but unfortunately that goes nowhere. However, they manage to use another Blade Runner parody to track down a prop maker by doing the police procedural enhance bit to track reflections through a photo until they find the prop maker's address. They take the bus, and Lister, while reading a magazine to learn about the show and seeing an article about Chloe Annette, is approached by two kids who talk about how cool they think Lister is. Before revealing their theory that Kachansky isn't really dead, she just took a blue midget and went off on her own because Lister was on a one-way trip to killing himself with all the drinking and recklessness. After arriving at their destination, they run into Katerina again, and after she states that erasing Rimmer is fine because a hologram isn't a real person, and so killing one is ethically and morally fine, Rimmer pushes her in front of a car and her life is trashed. They meet with the prop maker Swallow, a reference to Hannibal Chew, and he gives them the address to someone who knows where the creator is and lends them the keys to Carbug 1, which he had stolen from the Red Dwarf fan club president, and they even sit in their usual positions. The address they need is on Coronation Street, and by that I mean they literally go to the set of the British soap opera Coronation Street. Oh dear Cloister, it's dimensions and time all over again. Nothing good ever comes from a British sci-fi show crossing over with a British soap opera. If I see an Uncanny Valley wax figure Holly come flying at the screen, I'm turning this off. Their contact on Coronation Street is, if you aren't familiar with the cast of that show, Craig Charles, aka the actor who plays Lister. Craig is charmed at first, seeing who he believes to be Robert Llewellyn, Danny John-Jules, and Chris Berry talking to him in character, but is quite disturbed when Lister walks in, making a cheeky reference to his own past drug problems. They get the address, and the subtle and not-so-subtle Blade Runner references go out the window when we see this shot of London, with a giant Tyrell building sitting in the middle of it. They go up to their creator's apartment and find him dressed as Eldon Tyrell, loading a gun with 4 bullets, one for each of them. They demand resolution to all their loose plot threads, giving ideas for crappy spin-offs and reboots, but the creator won't budge, and reads them their death scene, which is a parody of Zora's retirement scene, and a very well-done parody at that. The creator tells them to start running, but the dwarfers are not ones who have ever given in to death before.
You can't whack death on the head. If he comes near me, I'm gonna rip his nipples off.
One night. It's not enough. I want more.
Not today, matey. Remember, only the good die young.
And that doesn't start now. They grab the creator's gun and Rimmer demands a happy ending. Unfortunately, the creator has the power to write their future and steals the gun back. They could give in, but instead Lister just kills him like Rutger Hauer killed Tyrell, though far less gruesomely or purposely. Except it was all part of the script, their street death was faked, and they're just living out the creator's script. Lister burns the rest of the script and sets out to write a new ending, though he doesn't waste the opportunity to send the rest of the crew into slapstick scenarios involving rakes and Rimmer slamming his crotch into a desk. They soon realize that the typewriter isn't controlling anything, and the cat questions his origami squids, opening it up and causing Crichton to realize that they're in a shared hallucination. Like the Despair Squid from Series 5's Back to Reality, only difference is this scenario is pleasant. Kachansky arrives and Lister decides to stay behind in the hallucination, with Crichton revealing that the kids on the bus were right, and Kachansky is alive as the rest of them wake up. Crichton posits that they fought off the ink on their own because of their previous encounter, as Lister remains in his coma, seeing Kachansky looking like Sean Young at the end of Blade Runner. They start to go off together, but Lister eventually realizes that he can't hide in a hallucination forever, and gives up his happy ending, despite Kachansky stating flat out that he's got no chance with her in the real world. In the wrap-up, Crichton reveals that the squid was female as opposed to male, so its ink causes joy. The only question is how it got into the tank in the first place. And the cat realizes that he had taken it on board at the end of Series 5, and it escaped, so Cat never told anyone because he knew they'd be mad. And I bet losing Red Dwarf, the nanobots, and all that craziness helped as well. And the special ends with the dwarfers discussing how funny it is that the people of the real world will live out their days thinking that they're real, as opposed to the dwarfers who are doing the exact same thing. We'll be back faster than you can say. Cesium Frankolithic Nixialibidium Smeg. This may take a while. Cesium Frankolithic Nixialibidium. Shopping for glasses can be a real pain in the ass. On the one hand, at a lot of retailers, especially if you go through your optometrist's office, you can get price gouged and spend upwards of $300 for a single pair of standard glasses. I know I did. On the other hand, there's a lot of online retailers that do it way cheaper, but when it comes to glasses, you're not going to be really sure how you like them until you get them on your face, and if they don't fit right, or you don't like the way the frames look, or the style just isn't right, you've got to return them and deal with that hassle, and then you got to start all over again and find a new pair. Which is why it's fortunate that today's video is sponsored by Warby Parker. Warby Parker makes vintage-inspired eyeglasses starting at just $95, which is an absolute steal for glasses, and they do something that I've never seen any other online retailer do. They offer a home try-on option, which allows you to, if you go to this link, warbyparkertrial.com/BlackScarabFilmZ, to pick out 5 pairs of glasses that they will send to you absolutely free, with both shipping and return postage paid. And once you get the glasses, you can try them on, and if you don't like any, you just send them all back and try again. But if you find a pair that you love, like I did, you just add them to your cart, put your prescription in, and buy them. Personally, right now, I'm in the market for a new pair of sunglasses because my old pair broke, and I figured if I was going to spend money on a new pair, I might as well be able to see out of them. $95 might seem like a lot of money for a pair of glasses, but the first pair that I bought from the optometrist's office was close to $300, so $95 is a friggin' steal, and these are much better quality. Plus, Warby Parker is always debuting new styles, so there's literally something for everyone, and if there isn't something that you like now, they might have a style you like in the future. And they have brick-and-mortar locations in case you need them adjusted. So, if you're in the market for new glasses and you want to do the home try-on, go to warbyparkertrial.com/BlackScarabFilmZ. That's BlackScarabFilmZ with a Z. How do I look? Cesium Frankolithic Nixialibidium Rixie-Dixie-Doxy-Dexy-Droxide. Yes! Oh! I knew I could do it. Oh, we're back with, the show. It's not 100% back to basics, given that it's a concept piece, and to explain what I mean by that, like many revivals, the entire special has a conceit behind it. The Brady Bunch spin-offs were not attempts to recreate the original show, like modern Doctor Who, or MST3K The Return, or the glut of television revivals we've gotten in recent years, where they just do the same thing, but in the modern day. They were different genres, with the Bradys placed into them. The Odd Couple, but Brady's. 30-something, but Brady's. Not a bad idea, but the new shows couldn't capture the same magic as the original because the concept was holding them back. It's the same situation here. They wanted to do a Blade Runner parody, so they put the boys from The Dwarf into it. So, unlike, say, the series we've seen since, it's not a traditional set of episodes. But that doesn't mean it's bad, and despite being away for close to a decade, The actors fell right back into doing their characters. Sure, they're older, and the Crichton makeup looks a little bizarre, given how they've made strides to ensure that Robert Llewellyn spends the least amount of time in the makeup chair as possible, but the actors excel with the script they were given. I think SF Debris said it best in his review. It's got that comfort food quality, so regardless of any of the problems, it's still Red Dwarf at its core, like Doctor Who and MST3K are. There are a lot of good jokes too, especially about the inconsistencies with Red Dwarf's own timeline compared to ours. Since Red Dwarf started in 1988, they used VHS tapes and comparatively retro technology in what was supposedly the distant future, explaining it with the very Red Dwarf answer of humans are incapable of returning discs to the packaging and lose them too easily compared to a big tape that you can't easily misplace. Which I think is giving humans too much credit, because if you lose the clamshell or the cardboard to tell the difference between the tapes, it can take ages to find the right one, because 90% of them are all the same damn color. There's also a great one about Lister due to finding a stall without any bog roll in it, believing that humanity didn't use toilet paper in the 21st century, and used a sink to clean himself and dried off with the hand dryer. And I really hope it wasn't one of those accelerator ones, because those will blow your intestines clean up your throat and out your mouth. I also love the bits where they joke that Series 9, which doesn't really exist, is the best season of the show. It's one of my favorite things to watch, right up there with my review of The Hunt for Red October. But I digress. I also like the basic concept of them going to the real world. It's extremely meta, and that entire sequence with the group meeting Craig's Charles was awesome. As was the scene with Lister and the kids on the bus, and of course I really love that the episode is a sequel to what just might be the best Red Dwarf episode ever, Series 5's Back to Reality. It lets them get in some mythology gags, but the episode isn't required viewing since it's based on an event we never actually saw. Sort of like Wrath of Khan in that regard. Also, it's a very enjoyable film to watch. Sometimes episodes with multiple parts can be a slog to get through after the first viewing. I know I have problems with the DC Arrowverse crossovers if I'm watching in the off-season without the momentum of the build-up. Back to Earth is always a fun watch, although I admit I don't rewatch it nearly as much as I do scattered episodes from the other non-connected series. But the pacing is good, and it lacks a lot of the problems that Series 7 and 8 had. Even without the studio audience, it felt like it was intended to be a comedy. The focus was squarely on the Dwarfers, and while I didn't dislike Kachansky, it was nice to have just the core four once again. And while losing Holly was sad, ultimately he wouldn't have had much to do anyway, since they spent nearly the entire special in a dream sequence, and Holly would have managed to snap him out of it way earlier, given that he'd already done that in Back to Reality. I also liked Katerina, even if she was only basically around for exposition, and to do competent things that the Red Dwarf crew have no chance of managing by themselves. And the creator being an actor and not just Doug Naylor, which would have been the predictable path, was another good choice. That being said, I have some notes. I had not seen Blade Runner prior to seeing this way back in 2012. It was just never on my radar until I saw it in a film class in 2014, I want to say. So the parody elements just flew right over my head until I saw the film. But even so, it's a weird choice to go for a straight parody instead of a broad genre parody like Red Dwarf usually does. Apparently it's because Blade Runner was part of the inspiration for Rob Grant and Doug Naylor to put pen to paper, and while that's very nice, I found it to be lacking, mainly because it never really goes more than surface deep into the parody, because the plots are so radically different. The Dwarfers aren't replicants, so all the parody elements felt out of place for me. If you like them, that's your opinion and I respect it, but I personally didn't. I mean, Atop the Fourth Wall is what inspired me to create these reviews, and you don't see me ripping elements from that with no regards to whether they fit into my content. Bad example. And even having seen Blade Runner in the intervening time, despite seeing that the death scene is a really good recreation, it still lacks meaning. And I hesitate to use this comparison, but it's the Doug Walker method of parody, based on something without changing it a whole lot, where the novelty is simply, hey, That happened in Blade Runner. Instead of it being a meta-commentary that uses Blade Runner to explore, say, the differences between sci-fi comedies like Red Dwarf and cyberpunk sci-fi thrillers like Blade Runner. Red Dwarf is at its best when it turns a familiar plot on its head, and it just doesn't do that with Blade Runner. It plays a lot of it completely straight, which honestly just doesn't work. And the effects aren't as good as they could be. Red Dwarf was always on a shoestring, but low-budget CGI always looks obvious, and there's no way to make bad CGI charming in the same way that you can with practical effects. It's not detrimental, and I will admit it is impressive given that they had no money, 3 episodes, and the Scudder was animated by one dude for free because he was a huge fan. But I have to comment on it or else someone will correct me in the comments. There's also some inconsistencies with certain characters, with how Rimmer acts in the diving bell scene being smeg-headed even for him. He usually follows regulations to the exact letter, so seeing him reading a magazine and listening to music instead of paying attention was weird. Same with how nonchalantly everyone seemed to take Katarina's arrival, although one could argue that the squid ink was inhibiting their regular emotions, because despite their differences, I can't see a scenario where after all this time together, they'd just let Rimmer be destroyed. Shut down for a bit maybe just to shut him up, but erase completely? Nuh-uh. For the first part of the special, before all the Blade Runner stuff, when it was just back to basics Red Dwarf, I'd really only remove that scene with Rimmer ignoring the diving bell, and instead have him bungle the controls by trying to read a manual to ensure it's by the book, aided by a few scenes before they go down of Rimmer doing a ridiculously in-depth checklist. That just feels more in character than just ignoring everyone with music. Everything else was a return to form for the show and felt just like classic Red Dwarf. For parts 2 and 3, however, I've got 2 versions in my head for how to fix it. There's one where they cut out all the Blade Runner parody elements and instead go for full meta-commentary, where the Red Dwarf crew have to find their creator to discover how to get home. I'd have loved to see something more akin to Red Shirts, which I, coincidentally, first reviewed right before the 4 Red Dwarf novels, where the characters from the book crossed over to the real world and met the people who played them in the fictitious Star Trek XP. Maybe something like what we saw in the Jay and Silent Bob reboot, spoilers if you haven't seen it, where Kevin Smith plays double duty as both Silent Bob and Kevin Smith, and they interact with him a lot in the final act, and it's just funny to see. So instead of just the scene on Coronation Street, we get an entire plot where all the actors play double duty as themselves and their characters. And maybe the big scene before finding their creator, who I still think should be the same guy from Back to Earth and not actually be Doug Naylor, would be them walking onto the set of Back to Earth, and they film the ending scene instead of the actors, because they just happen to be there, sort of like the 5-ish Doctors special from Doctor Who. My alternate idea is to go all in on the Blade Runner parodies, but use it as a vehicle to show how sci-fi has gravitated more towards seriousness and grit in the years since Red Dwarf premiered, with most sci-fi, even Doctor Who, which was known for camp in certain parts of the classic era, going very dour and serious. Take the elements from Blade Runner and play with them, showing how Red Dwarf has entered an era where jokey sci-fi is less well regarded, and they have to fight against it in order to find their creator, who intends to inject those elements into the new series, and beg them to not forget the value of comedy and levity in sci-fi. I just want to repair chicken soup nozzles, not have a life-or-death battle of ethics every week. Like I said earlier, Red Dwarf is at its best when it's turning genre conventions on their heads, so this would be right up their alley. Either way, it's not so much a major alteration as it is streamlining the plot into a cohesive whole while using the available parts. And that was Red Dwarf Back to Earth, which, while it wasn't as good as what came before or after, is still a bright spot of Red Dwarf, and gave them a chance to truly return for an additional 3 series and a special thus far, and for that, I salute them. And there's no telling what we'll get in the future. I, for one, can't wait to get more Red Dwarf, because otherwise my BritBox subscription is really only good for classic Doctor Who. Speaking of classic Doctor Who, since Doctor Who's 56th anniversary is next week, why don't we head back to the literary lair and take another look at a Big Finish audio drama? See you next time. They end up in the department store electronics department playing a trailer of the exact special that we're watching. Huh, this is Beastmaster 2 all over again.